The alien matriarch offered him sanctuary. Her true motive shook his soul. The corridors of Starhaven Outpost reeked of cheap liquor, recycled air, and broken dreams. Under flickering neon strips, Dax moved with the wary quickness of a man who'd grown too used to the scent of danger. He ducked into a dim alcove, but it was too late. 3 men blocked the only exit. Their leader, Graven, stood a head taller than the others, his cybernetic jaw twitching with anticipation. Scar tissue puckered around the metal, and his eyes gleamed with the joy of impending violence. Graven's shadow fell over Dax as he stepped forward, knuckles popping like distant gunfire. "End of the line, Ambassador," Graven rumbled, voice distorted by synth vocals. Dax raised his hands, palms outward, flashing a crooked smile. "Former Ambassador," he corrected, infusing his tone with mock cheer. "My resignation was, let's say, mutual." The other thugs, one wiry, the other sporting a tattooed scalp, laughed, mean and sharp. Graven's fist hovered in the stale air, and Dax searched the corridor for any chance of escape. None. The crowd pressed back, eager to watch but not to interfere. Dax's heart hammered in his chest. Graven lunged. Suddenly, the raucous din of the corridor drained into hush. The crowd parted like a tide beneath a silent moon. Heads bowed, whispers died. 2 figures approached. One, an alien guard built like a walking fortress, obsidian armor gleaming under the blue-white lights. The other, a woman who seemed to float rather than walk. Larea. She was tall, blue-skinned, with a mane of red hair and amber eyes that shone from behind a silver mask covering half her face. White robes draped her form, ethereal yet authoritative, and every step drew eyes and silenced breath. Her gaze swept the tableau with cool disdain. "Is there a dispute?" Her voice was melodic and icy, cutting through the tension. Graven's bravado dissolved. He averted his gaze and bowed his head. "Cartel business, Lady Larea," he muttered, the title chafing his pride. Larea's amber eyes slid to Dax, her expression unreadable but intensely appraising. Dax met her stare, pulse racing. There was danger here, but a different flavor. He shrugged with studied nonchalance. "Just a disagreement over the definition of repayment." Larea's lips twitched in a suggestion of a smile, and she nodded almost imperceptibly to her guard. The armored figure produced a credit stick and tossed it to Graven, the device spinning end over end before clattering at the brute's feet. "This matter is resolved," Larea declared, voice brooking no argument. Graven bent to scoop up the stick, resentment flickering in his eyes, but he retreated, his lackeys scrambling to follow. The corridor slowly filled with murmured speculation as Larea stepped closer to Dax. Up close, her presence was overwhelming, otherworldly, her scent sharp, almost mineral. She regarded him as if he were a puzzle she had already solved. "You are Dax, once of the Solarian Diplomatic Corps, expert in crisis mediation. Disowned." He managed a crooked smile, straightening his jacket. "You've done your homework, or at least skimmed the summary. I have need of your skills. My house requires a negotiator. The reward is considerable, sanctuary included." Dax tilted his head, weighing options, calculating escape routes. "And the condition? Your allegiance. To me. Your skills. Your loyalty. Your time." There it was. The trap disguised as an offer. The eyes of the outpost were still on him, expectant, hungry for spectacle. Dax's choices had narrowed to a single uncertain path. He straightened, meeting Larea's gaze with a hint of defiance. "Deal." Her guard gestured, armor whispering against itself. Larea led Dax through the parted crowd, a silent procession of wary onlookers marking their passage. Down narrow walkways and past blinking security sensors, she guided him to a private docking bay, sealed off from the clamor of the station. Inside, Leraya's ship waited, a sleek obsidian vessel, all sharp lines and humming power. The airlock hissed open, welcoming them into a world of cold, minimalist opulence. Every surface gleamed, the design both functional and intimidating. Dax was led to his quarters. Steel walls, a low cot, and a closet already stocked with attire that fit him perfectly. He ran his hand over the fabrics. Someone had studied his measurements, his preferences. He was not here by accident. He showered, scrubbing away layers of station grime, but the sense of being claimed lingered beneath his skin. After changing into fresh clothes, he wandered the narrow corridors, taking in the sterile elegance, the faint thrum of engines, and the ever-present surveillance. Leraya entered without warning, gliding into the room as if she'd materialized from thin air. Her white robes flowed around her, accentuating her lithe alien form. The half-mask caught the light, lending her an enigmatic beauty. The miners of Veyron 9 are reneging on their contract, citing tectonic instability. My analysts say they're bluffing, she said, voice clipped and businesslike. Dax sat, crossing his legs with practiced ease. And you want me to convince them otherwise? Leraya nodded. You will be provided the files. You have until tomorrow. She handed him a data slate. He began scanning through reports, environmental logs, communications between the miners and Leraya's representatives. Leraya watched him work, silent, predatory, her presence a constant pressure. Hours blurred together as he sifted through false data, cross-referencing seismic scans with supply manifests. Finally, Dax leaned back, fatigue and satisfaction blending in his expression. Their arguments built on obsolete data. We can either seize their assets outright or, better, we sell them new survey results at a premium. Let them save face, but pay for the privilege. Leraya's eyes sparkled with approval. The latter. Mutual gain over force. Smart. She stepped close, her robes whispering against the floor until she was almost touching him. Her fingers, cool as polished stone, brushed his jaw, sending a shiver down his spine. Now, Leraya whispered, her voice smoky and intent, the other part of your payment. She kissed him, cool, commanding, her lips a challenge and a promise. Dax responded in kind, refusing to yield, turning the moment into a contest of wills. As her robe slipped from her shoulders, Dax realized, with a breathless certainty, that in this game, surrender was inevitable. Their days blurred into a rhythm of tactics and fire, the pulse of Starhaven replaced by the calculated machinations of House Miren. In the cool, shadowed rooms of Leraya's obsidian ship, Dax found himself transformed. Daylight, if one could call the artificial glimmer of shipboard cycles daylight, brought endless strategy sessions. Leraya's council was a blend of the calculating and the desperate, traitors, former pirates, exiled nobles, and her own fierce, silent guard. Dax sat at Leraya's right hand, a position at once coveted and resented. Maps flickered in holographic displays. Voice after voice pitched schemes, alliances, takeovers, subterfuge. Dax read between the lines, slicing through bluster with razor wit, always knowing Leraya watched him as closely as she watched her rivals. And when the meetings ended, when the holograms blinked out and the counselors retreated to shadowed alcoves, the real battles began. Night in Leraya's domain was a different theater. It belonged to whispered provocations, hungry glances, and collisions in the privacy of her chambers. Each encounter was a contest, never soft, never yielding. Dax learned the map of Leraya's body the way he learned the map of her house. Her language was spoken in sighs, in the scrape of her nails, in a murmured command against his skin. Sometimes she was the conqueror, sometimes he, but always there was a sense of being claimed and reclaimed, as if each night reset the balance of power between them. In these moments, Dax was consort, strategist, captive, and, against all logic, exhilarated. Larea demanded everything, but in return, she granted him something he'd lost long ago: purpose. With Dax's guidance, House Mirren flourished. Larea deployed his insights like weapons, outmaneuvering rivals, brokering deals with a ruthless elegance that left their enemies scrambling. Rival houses fell, absorbed into Mirren's sphere. Larea rewarded him with freedom, of movement, of thought, of resources. She let him shape the house's future, but never let him forget whose domain it was. Dax had never belonged to anyone, not really. Now, he was undeniably hers. Yet, in the midst of all this, Larea's iron rule softened by increments. Small gestures slipped through the cracks of her mask, a lingering touch on his arm as she passed, a rare smile flashing across her lips during a meeting, a glance from across a crowded room that made the air between them crackle. The ship's opulence became less a gilded cage and more a strange kind of home. Twice each week, Larea's chief medic visited Dax's quarters. The medic was a delicate avian alien, all elegant bones and feathery plumage the color of frost. Their eyes, black and quick, missed nothing. Without fail, the medic arrived at the scheduled hour, rolling in a floating tray of implements. "The lady insists on monitoring her principal assets," the medic would chirp, not unkindly. Dax always offered his arm with a resigned smile. "I feel fine," he'd protest. "Feelings are not data," the medic replied, already drawing blood with practiced efficiency. Scanners hummed and lights danced across his skin. The medic was all business, never lingering, never offering more than the required professional courtesies. Dax suspected their loyalty was to Larea alone. After each visit, Larea would appear at some point, sometimes in the quiet of the evening, sometimes in the aftermath of another council meeting, her expression unreadable. She would touch his face, fingers cool and precise. "Your cell regeneration is excellent, neural patterns stable. I must protect my investment." The words stung and soothed in equal measure. Larea's gaze bored into him, searching for any sign of weakness, any flaw in the asset she had acquired. Yet her lips would find his in the next moment, her touch shifting from clinical to possessive, a reclamation, a wordless assurance that she was not indifferent. Dax accepted her concern, telling himself it was for him, not just the commodity he represented. He let her claim him, found a strange security in her absolute control. After so many years drifting, always on the edge of someone else's war, someone else's agenda, the certainty of her attention, even when it was sharp and cold, became its own kind of comfort. Time passed, marked by the rise and fall of fortunes. House Mirren's emblem appeared on trade manifests and shipping docks across 3 sectors. Dax's name was whispered in the halls of power, sometimes with awe, more often with grudging respect. And always, in the shadows, Larea watched, shaping both him and the house to her will. It was not love, Dax thought. At least, not as he'd understood it before. It was something fiercer, more consuming. A partnership founded on mutual need, mutual hunger. Sometimes, in the quiet after their battles, Larea would rest her head on his chest, and for a moment, he would believe he had found peace. That illusion shattered one night. A blackout hit without warning. The ship's systems groaned, lights flickered, and for a heartbeat everything was silence and darkness. Larea was away, deep in negotiations on a rival station. Dax was alone, lying on their rumpled bed, the echo of their last encounter still humming beneath his skin. Emergency lighting kicked in, painting the corridor outside in stripes of crimson and gold. Instinct, honed from years in hostile territory, shoved him to his feet. He pulled on a shirt and slipped out of the quarters, moving with practiced stealth. Laraya's ship was a fortress, its restricted areas always sealed tight, guarded by her ever-present soldiers. But tonight, the path to the Medica lab lay open. The heavy security doors hung ajar, emergency protocols suspended by the blackout. He hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The lab was colder than the rest of the ship, its air sharp with disinfectant. Holographic panels blinked in standby mode. Gene sequencers and bioprinters lined the walls, their sleek forms humming softly. Dax moved through the sterile chamber, fingertips brushing against consoles, drawn by a pull he couldn't name. He approached the main terminal, expecting the usual web of locked files and encrypted protocols. Most were sealed, marked with the sigils of House Muren and genetic security codes he'd never seen. But one folder stood out, labeled in ancient Solarian script, Inheritance. Curiosity warred with caution. Dax entered the passcode he'd used for minor reports, fully expecting rejection. Instead, the file opened. It was a log. The author's name blinked at the top of the display. Dr. Soren Vale, Laraya's late partner. The first entry glowed on the screen, waiting to be read. Dax leaned into the blue-white glow of the terminal, the screen's pulse reflected in his eyes. The log's opening lines unfurled in Dr. Soren Vale's measured, intimate voice, a voice both scientific and confessional, as if each entry were a secret meant only for the dark. Vale wrote of Laraya first, his fascination, his longing. He wrote with the clarity of a man who had weighed the cost of loving someone both beautiful and dangerous. He chronicled nights spent at Laraya's side, trying to decipher the enigma of House Muren, its ancient customs, and the quiet pride that shaped her. Beneath the declarations of love, frustration simmered. A scholar's impatience with centuries of evolutionary stagnation. Muren, he wrote, was a bloodline trapped in its own myth, convinced that genetic purity alone would secure its place in the galaxy. Then the log shifted, growing clinical. Vale described his research, his obsession with the rumor of dormant psychic ability in the Mirren line, telekinesis lying fallow, present only as ghost stories and half-remembered incidents in family archives. The logs detailed years of failed experiments, dead ends, and ethical lines blurred for the sake of progress. The spark, Vale believed, was there, hidden, waiting for the right trigger. Laraya's ancestors had dreamed of it. Vale had set out to realize it. He chronicled attempts with Myron subjects, each trial ending in disappointment. The mutation he sought would not ignite, the psychic gift refusing to manifest. Only a rare genetic spark, a catalyst, could activate it. Months became years. Despair crept into Vale's words. Then, breakthrough. Vale's excitement crackled through the words. He traced the genetic anomaly, the dormant code, to a single human lineage, survivors of the lost colony ship Aurora. The gene was vanishingly rare, undiluted only in a handful of lines scattered across known space. A 1 in a billion match. Vale's logs detailed a years-long search, data poured over in sterile labs, entire populations sequenced and dismissed. The carrier, he wrote, must be ideal, compatible with Lyraya, strong of mind and body, capable of surviving the process. Dax scrolled through the entries, hands numb. Each report grew more clinical, the language colder as Vale outlined potential candidates, testing protocols, and genetic simulations. The last log was tagged Spark Prime. His own name filled the header. Dax. Full genetic code. Family tree mapped back generations, names he'd heard in family stories, faces he remembered only in faded photographs. There were notes on his psychological profile, physical health, even old medical scans from his days in the diplomatic corps. Every visit with the medic, every blood draw, every scan, meticulous entries. Dax felt the world tilting under him. It was all here, in cold, undeniable detail. He was the match Vale had sought, the single human in all the galaxy whose DNA could awaken House Myron's latent gift. Not for who he was, but for what he carried in his cells. The rescue at Starhaven, the job offer, the perfectly tailored clothes, the medical checks, even the nights in Lyraea's arms, all orchestrated. The passion he'd thought was earned, the alliance he'd thought he'd shaped. It was a breeding program, 1,000 times more refined and ruthless than anything he'd ever imagined. The illusion shattered. The man he'd become here, strategist, consort, partner, was a fabrication, a role designed for him before he'd even stepped aboard Lyraea's ship. She had built the cage and handed him the key, letting him believe it was freedom. Dax sat back, shaking, heart pounding in his chest. The log flickered in the dark, words burning themselves into his memory. He wiped the console, erasing every trace of his intrusion, hands moving on autopilot. He shut the terminal down, smoothing the surface until it looked untouched. The blackout ended as abruptly as it began. Power surged through the ship's veins, lights returning to their usual crisp brilliance. Dax slipped back into the corridor, pulse racing, the cold emptiness of the medical lab echoing in his mind. Every moment since his arrival replayed with new clarity, Lyraea's searching glances, the medic's clinical detachment, the council's wary acceptance. He saw the calculation behind every gesture, every tender touch. By the time he returned to his quarters, he wore a new face. He slid into fresh clothing, practiced the old diplomatic calm in front of the mirror, mouth relaxed, eyes bright but unreadable. His body remembered the game, even as his mind threatened to splinter. He did not wait long. Lyraea swept in on a current of triumph, her every movement radiant. She wore victory like a cloak, her red hair unbound, eyes sparkling above the silver mask. Dax's chest constricted. He forced a smile. She approached, arms open, expectation in every line of her body. She reached for him, the conqueror collecting her prize. "Our strategy succeeded," she said, voice low, intimate. "The council bends. Rivals submit. House Myron stands above them all." Dax inclined his head, masking his rage behind a wry smile. "Our strategy, not mine," he corrected, voice smooth, careful. Lyraea smiled, a real, satisfied smile, the one she reserved for him alone. She cupped his jaw, thumb brushing his cheekbone. "Modesty does not suit you." She kissed him, slow and deep, claiming. The familiar heat sparked between them, but Dax kept his mind distant, cataloging every nuance of her touch. Her hands, once electric, felt cold now, a scientist testing an experiment, not a lover seeking connection. He responded with practiced skill, letting her lead, every move precise, controlled. He studied her, the way her breath hitched, the shift of her eyes, the smallest tremor in her fingers. Every caress became a probe, every whispered word a data point. Dax's body played its part, but his mind drifted above, detached, calculating. Lyraea pulled him closer, believing the illusion. "We are unstoppable, you and I," she murmured. "Together, we will make history." He smiled, brushing her hair back. "History remembers the victors," he said softly, the words a mask for the truth burning in his chest. That night, Dax waited until Lyraea slept, her body curled possessively around his. He stared at the ceiling, heart hammering, replaying the logs over and over. His sense of self was gone, replaced by the cold certainty of purpose. He was no longer a participant, but an actor. Every moment a performance, every smile a weapon. He waited, perfected the illusion of devotion, bided his time, Suddenly, explosions. The world tilted as concussive force rattled the habitat to its bones. The ceiling lights flickered, alarms screaming their warnings through every corridor. In Dax's quarters, glass shattered, the floor trembling underfoot. Larea spun, blue-skinned and wild-eyed, her composure stripped away by the shockwave. She tore open a weapons locker, tossing Dax a blaster with a clipped, furious motion. "House Veyron, they know you're here. They'll try to take you." Her voice was all steel and ice, unshaken even as the structure groaned around them. Dax caught the weapon, fingers settling into the familiar grip. Larea armed herself with practiced efficiency, the silver mask gleaming over her contorted features. The corridor outside filled with the footfalls of panicked aides and the shouts of armed Mirren guards. A holocom flickered to life, Rivan's face ghostly and sharp in the chaos. Larea's security chief looked haggard, one shoulder darkened with blood. "Lady Larea, intruders at levels 2 and 4, they're inside the perimeter, breaching all primary defenses. Habitat's not built for this." Larea barked commands, directing her forces to choke points and fallback positions. But Dax saw it instantly, the flaw in her strategy. She was a ruler, trained to command, not to fight a battle for survival on her own ground. He stepped forward, adrenaline sharpening his mind. "Let them think they're winning," he said, voice low but forceful. Larea turned, surprise flickering in her eyes. Dax didn't wait for approval. He lunged for the command console, bypassing the station's security with fingers flying over the controls. The screen spat error codes, but Dax knew the old tricks. He vented coolant into the external sensor array, fogging the attacker's vision and sacrificing valuable stores to buy time. With another command, he sealed off secondary access ways, rerouting power to bulkhead doors. "Riven, fall back. Get your people to Sector Gamma and seal the hatches behind you." Dax ordered through the comm, his voice carrying authority no one dared challenge. "Once you're clear, flood Sector Gamma with inert gas, non-lethal, but enough to slow them down." Larea stared, momentarily stunned. For the first time, she was not in control. Dax was the conductor, the entire habitat his instrument. He watched the tactical map update, attackers pressing forward into corridors now slick with vapor and static. Dax manipulated the environment, forcing Veyron's mercenaries into bottlenecks, triggering automated fire suppression in their path, using the station itself as a weapon. He caught their encrypted comms, fingers dancing as he broke their code. Hidden in the chatter, he found the proof. House Veyron had sabotaged the habitat systems days before, laying the groundwork for this assault. He filed a legal complaint with the sector fleet, attaching the decrypted logs. His face was stone as he turned to Larea. "They came for my DNA. They'll be arrested for biotheft." Alarms shifted in tone, the crimson lights replaced by flashing blue. In the distance, engines rumbled, patrol ships, sector fleet, arriving at last. The attackers' momentum crumbled. Veyron's mercenaries, cut off and gasping for breath, dropped their weapons as Mirren security closed in. There was no heroic last stand, only a sudden collective understanding that the battle was lost, not to guns, but to law. The habitat was battered, corridors scorched and walls pocked by plasma fire, but House Mirren still stood. Rivan limped through the smoke, helmet under his arm, offering Dax a look that was not quite gratitude, not quite awe. The others, guards, aides, even Larea's silent alien protector, regarded him with newfound respect, the reality of his authority plain in their eyes. As the adrenaline faded, Dax felt the emotional storm rise. He found Larea amid the wreckage of the main hall, her robes torn and blood on her sleeve, but her posture rigid with defiance. He strode to her, the ruins echoing around them. "They weren't after your research," he said, voice rough with accusation. "They wanted me, the spark." Larea, ever the mask, faltered. For the first time since he'd met her, her composure cracked. She looked at him, eyes wide and unguarded, the truth trembling on her lips. "Yes," she whispered. "At first it was calculation. I needed the genetic spark. But I didn't account for you. Your mind, your defiance. The equation changed. The asset developed feelings for the project. A critical flaw." Dax's anger surged. "Don't hide behind science. You lied. You used me." Larea's chin trembled. "And I fell in love with you. I regret both." The air between them crackled, charged with everything unsaid. Dax closed the distance in 2 strides, gripping her arms, bruising in his need to feel her real, solid, not just a dream of calculation and fate. Their lips crashed together, anger and betrayal tangled with longing. The kiss was bruising, desperate, a raw confession in the ruins, neither surrender nor victory but a truce forced by necessity. When they broke apart, Dax kept his hands on her, eyes blazing. "No more projects," he said, voice low, final. Larea, eyes shining with unshed tears, nodded in defeat. He searched her face, finding the remnants of the woman he had loved, the one who had both built his prison and freed him with a single act of vulnerability. "You wanted an heir. You thought too small. The power isn't just in my genes, Larea, but in what we can build, together. I offer you a new deal. I stay as your partner, not your property. No more secrets. Our house, our future, together." Larea's breath caught. Stunned, she studied him, hope flickering where there had only been calculation. She reached up, touching his cheek, gentle now. "And what do you want?" she asked softly. Dax let out a breath, some old tension finally breaking. "Justice, power, a home, and you." For a moment, the devastation around them faded. Larea's hand lingered on his cheek. Their next kiss was soft, tentative, a new pact forged in the aftermath. Equals at last, partners by choice, not by design. 5 years later, Grand Atrium of Arcos. Under the soaring lattice of crystal and steel, the galaxy's elite converged in a dazzling tide of color and intrigue. Envoys in tailored silks mingled with armored dignitaries, their badges of office flashing like stars beneath the atrium's colossal glass dome. The banners of ancient houses and emergent powers drifted overhead on silent repulsor lifts, heralding alliances that spanned the spiral arms. Above them all, on a private balcony wreathed in subtle shields and living orchids, Dax watched the pageant unfold. He stood straight, shoulders eased by confidence earned over 5 years of delicate victories and hard-won trust. The cut of his attire spoke of both Mirran elegance and Terran discipline. At his side, Larea radiated authority, her white and silver robes draped over blue skin, hair still a firefall of red, half-mask now ceremonial rather than armor. She had changed, yes, but the core of her presence remained undimmed, regal, magnetic, utterly herself. Dax's gaze lingered on her. He drank in the way she tilted her head, the curve of a smile meant only for him. She caught his eyes, her own amber gaze steady. One heartbeat, then another. A silent conversation built on the mortar of 1,000 shared memories. The world fell away in that look. In the space between them lived every battle, every wound, every healing touch. Far below, the Terran delegation entered, a ripple of interest moving through the crowd as their emerald banners unfurled. At their front strode Ambassador Vale, his bearing as precise as ever, his silver-flecked hair tamed by age and wisdom. Once, he and Dax had circled each other as rivals. Now, Vale's approach was measured, hand extended not as a weapon, but as an equal. Dax met him at the top of the curving staircase. Larea came to stand at his side, her hand warm at the small of his back. The gesture was intimate, easy. the kind of touch that said to the world, "This is my partner, my chosen, and I stand beside him willingly." Vale offered a slight bow, a respectful greeting. "The Solarian Union is prepared to offer House Mirren associate status," he said, voice echoing just enough for the nearby dignitaries to hear. Dax smiled, polite, but edged with steel. A generous gesture, but insufficient. Vale arched an eyebrow. "Indeed?" "House Myron is indispensable," Dax continued, voice carrying the weight of years. "Our innovations have stabilized 3 sectors. Our diplomatic interventions resolved the Ashani Schism and the Alara embargo. Your offer recognizes our contributions, but it does not reflect the reality. We insist on full partnership, a seat at the table, shared command in Union affairs." Larea said nothing, simply rested her hand at Dax's back. Her silence was an amplifier, drawing every eye. Even Vale seemed to sense the balance had shifted. He hesitated, weighing the future behind hooded eyes. "You drive a hard bargain, Dax. But the galaxy has changed, and you have changed it." "I concede. Full partnership, with all attendant rights and responsibilities." Dax inclined his head. "Then let us draft the terms together." The Terran delegation withdrew, the deal sealed with a clasped hand and the low murmur of excited witnesses. The moment the diplomats were gone, Larea pulled Dax to her. Her arms slipped around him, and for a moment, the noise of the galaxy faded to a hush. "You unraveled decades of politics in minutes, my love," she breathed, laughter coloring her words. He caught her face in his hands, thumb tracing the line where mask met skin. "Only because you gave me something worth fighting for." Their kiss was deep, harmonious, a slow fusion of memory and promise. Gone was the fire of their first desperate collisions. In its place was something enduring. Passion forged into lasting love, the knowledge that every trial had been a stepping stone to this moment. After the celebration, they returned to the ship that had become their home, a cozy, cluttered nest orbiting Arcos. The corridors were no longer cold and sterile. They were lined with paintings, children's toys, and the scattered evidence of a life lived fully. Larea poured herself a cup of bitter tea, curling into the corner of the battered sofa as Dax shed his formal jacket. He watched her for a moment, the light painting her features with a softness he would have sworn impossible years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly, settling beside her. Larea traced the rim of her cup, thoughtful. "I regret the woman I was. I saw you as a key, not the man who held it." She glanced up, a rueful smile curling her lips. "My mistake was not seeing your true potential." Dax took her hand, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "You see me now." She leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "I do." A thud and a giggle echoed down the corridor. Their daughter, Sarah, just 3, but already the axis around which their universe spun, toddled into the room. Dark hair curled over blue skin, and her amber eyes shone with mischief. In her tiny hand she gripped a pebble, brow furrowed in concentration. With a flicker of will, the stone rose into the air, spinning gently. Sarah beamed, delighted at her own magic. Dax laughed, kneeling to meet her at eye level. Larea knelt beside him, fingers brushing his as he caught the stone and gently returned it to their daughter's palm. They did not flinch from Sarah's gift. There were no genetic studies, no whispered plans, only pride and wonder. They had made a home where legacy was not a curse, but a possibility. Dax looked up at Larea, love and hope braided in his gaze. "Our legacy is that we built something better than what we inherited." Night settled softly over the ship, a hush that stretched from the portholes to the very heart of their private quarters. Beyond the transparisteel window, stars drifted by in slow, majestic arcs, a silent ballet of distant firelight. Inside, All was quiet except for the gentle breaths of a sleeping child and the subtle thrum of life support cycling through familiar walls. Sarah slept in her room down the hall, the door cracked just enough for the warm glow of her nightlight to spill onto the carpet. Her dreams, innocent and untroubled, were guarded by the two sentinels who had remade the universe for her. Dax and Lyrea found each other in the hush, drawn together by the gravity of years, of survival, of transformation. No longer adversaries or players in a game of shifting power, just two souls, battered and reformed, who had learned the shape of their own scars in the mirror of each other. Their passion was no longer edged with uncertainty or conquest. Now, every touch was deep and steady, an affirmation rather than a challenge. Lyrea's hands traced the lines of Dax's body, memorizing what time had refined rather than erased. Dax answered her with the patience of a man who no longer feared belonging. There were no more masks, no more bargains to strike, only the slow, loving dance of equals, each movement rich with memory, each kiss a renewal of trust built from the ashes of old betrayals. They made love as though the galaxy outside had finally stopped spinning, as though, in this small, precious space, time itself was theirs to shape. There was laughter in their whispers, and tears too, as old wounds became new vows, sealed skin to skin, heart to heart. Afterward, they lay entwined, the rhythm of their breathing a counterpoint to the slow drift of the stars beyond the glass. Lyrea's head rested on Dax's chest, her hair a red-gold halo against his skin. One hand curled possessively at his side, the other tracing idle patterns over his heart. For a long while there was no need for words. They watched the cosmos slip by, a scatter of blue nebulae, the flicker of distant freighters, the faint pulse of comm satellites relaying news of a galaxy forever changed. Lyrea's voice, when it came, was soft, but certain. The Terrans will accept your terms. We've made ourselves too vital to ignore. Dax smiled, his eyes never leaving the window's tapestry of light. We did it together, he said simply. He closed his eyes, letting the memories flow through him. He remembered the man he had been, the castaway skulking through outpost shadows, hunted and alone, clinging to cleverness and little else. He remembered the icy bite of exile, the taste of old failures, and the chill of a future stolen by others' ambitions. He remembered the moment he first met Lyrea, and the 1,000 after that, each one carving away some piece of the armor he had built around his soul. And Lyrea, beside him, had changed no less. Once a sovereign hemmed in by legacy, a woman driven by the cold calculus of survival, she had seen herself as a vessel for her house's future, until love had opened her to the risk of hope. She, too, remembered ambition's chains and the agony of watching her plans crack under the weight of human feeling. Dax tightened his hold on her, threading their fingers together. Their hands fit perfectly, one strong, one elegant, both marked by the choices that had brought them here. They had given each other shelter when the universe offered none. They had been adversaries, then conspirators, then lovers, and finally, partners in every sense that mattered. The union of their wounds and strengths had become something unbreakable. A fortress built not on secrets, but on mutual recognition and respect. Lyrea's breath warmed his chest, her heartbeat steady beneath his palm. She looked up at him, eyes shining in the dim starlight. "Do you ever wonder?" she asked quietly. "What would have happened if you'd refused my offer? If you'd never boarded my ship that night?" Dax considered it, his lips curving in a rueful smile. "Sometimes. But then I remember how lost I was, how much I needed someone to challenge me. You did that. You forced me to become the man I am." She smiled, a smile stripped of calculation, radiant in its simplicity. You became more than I ever imagined. You made me see past my own ambitions." He stroked her cheek, awed by the depth of his feeling. "We're more than what we started as, more than a project or a plan." She nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to his chest. "We're a home," she whispered. "For ourselves, for Sarah, for everyone who finds their way to us." In the quiet that followed, Dax let his mind wander, past the walls of their ship, past the corridors of power and the echo of old betrayals. He saw the future stretching out before them, bright and uncharted. Together they were more than the sum of their parts, a new force in the galaxy, born not from dominance or manipulation, but from the hardest thing either of them had ever dared: trust. He thought of Sarah, sleeping safe, her gifts treated as wonders, not weapons. He thought of the alliances and reforms they had built, true change rippling outwards from the fragile truce they had forged in a ruined habitat years ago. Lirea's voice was a whisper, barely more than a thought. "We're not shaped by secret genes or hidden power, are we?" Dax shook his head, smiling at the absurdity of all they'd once believed. "No. The future's shaped by the capacity to hope, even after everything. The willingness to build something new from the ashes." She nestled closer, her body fitting perfectly against his. "Together," she murmured. He pressed a kiss to her brow, listening to the quiet miracle of her breathing, the steady beat of her heart. In that moment, with the stars drifting by and the weight of the past finally shed, he understood. Their story was not about destiny, or even survival, but about the unlikely, indomitable human capacity to build hope from the ruins of deception, together. Our story ends here. Make sure you subscribe, press the like button, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most in this video. Your feedback means a lot to our team. You'll discover many more captivating stories on our channel. See you in the next one.